Good morning, and you're very welcome to this morning's Signpost programme. My name is Pat Murphy, Head of Environment Knowledge Transfer with Teagasc. This morning, I'm delighted to be joined by Paula Kearney from Galway City Council. Paula is the Biodiversity Officer with the Council, and I suppose she's been part of a movement over the last number of years where the county councils have been engaging biodiversity officers, I suppose, to help understand the biodiversity in the areas that they're working and to engage citizens and communities to improve biodiversity. You're very welcome, Paula.
Thanks very much for having me, Pat. I'm delighted. I'm delighted to be here. So I'm just making sure my phones are turned off.
Very good. No disruption.
Thanks very much.
Okay. The project, or the main part of the discussion, will be about a project where the bovines, who are often maligned as being a challenge to biodiversity, I suppose, can be part of the solution in some instances.
That's correct, yeah. I suppose it's really, the project was, I suppose, looking to engage the public on these projects and to, I suppose, demystify and maybe kind of remove the negative press that is surrounding, I suppose, agriculture and grazing, as that it is contrary to biodiversity, where it's actually quite the opposite. Really, from our first farmer 4,000 years ago, our landscape has relied on grazing and managed, and a lot of those grasslands are protected under European law. So we're very much reliant on grazing. Undergrazing is as much of a threat to our protected landscape as overgrazing is. So it's finding balance and very much working with farmers, and also they are the custodians of the landscape and learning from the generations of the work that they've done, and they'll know more about these places than we could ever even imagine. So, and every place is different, so it's really looking at different localities, looking at different areas, and working very much with the local farmers. Yeah, so it has been a very challenging project, but very interesting, and I suppose what I'll tell you through the talk, it has been really worthwhile. We've had amazing engagement, and really the participation of the local people of the area has been wonderful. And really, it's inspiring, as the children in particular, they come to site having researched agriculture, having researched climate change, and sustainable agriculture and all of that. So it really has been, it has been has exceeded my expectations. That's for sure. So yeah, share with you.
This morning by Ivan Kelly. Ivan is a biodiversity specialist, specialising in uplands and high nature value areas. You're very welcome, Ivan.
Thanks very much, Pat. Good to be here.
Okay, Paula, without further ado, if you're ready, we might share your presentation and fire ahead, if that's okay.
Right, you.
Just remind people that if you have any questions, that you put them in the Q&A, and we'll ask them at the end of the presentation.
Thanks very much, and thank you very much for the lovely introduction there, Pat. I work for Galway City Council, and so I'm part of the biodiversity programme, which has been led out by the Heritage Council, which supports the biodiversity officers across the country. I think we have a full complement now, nearly at this stage. I think Mayo is one of the last, so they're in the middle of procuring a biodiversity officer. So if anybody in the audience is interested in applying, I think that's the active at the moment. So a presentation there. So I'm going to give you a little background into the work of the biodiversity officers, particular to my role in Galway City. And really, it's kind of just going to bring you through how I really arrived at the Ballyloughane Conservation Grazing Project, and through, I suppose, the different activities and actions that are required by the biodiversity officer. So I'll just give you a flavour of the type of work and see how I arrived at this project. At the end, we'll have a short video on the Great Irish Grasslands if we have time, and if not, I can share the link around afterwards. So say I'm part of the local biodiversity officer programme, which is a very exciting initiative. There are biodiversity officers in some of our local authorities up to a number of years ago. In the last 2 years, this has really ramped up, and as I say, to have that presence. But before the biodiversity officers, there was amazing work being done by our heritage officers across the country, who have been in place for a number of years. So really we're standing on the shoulders of giants, really, the amazing work that they've been doing across the country. So it's very much working in collaboration with them, our heritage officers in the local authorities. So really the role of the Biodiversity Officer is, our main role is to really develop a biodiversity action plan if there isn't one in place. There is one available for Galway City Council. It was developed in 2014. And so in order to inform that, and as Pat said, it's really our job is to try and understand as best we can the biodiversity of our jurisdictions, the threats and pressures on that, and equally what we're doing well and what maybe we need to improve upon. A lot of this fed down from national policy, from the National Biodiversity Action Plan, and also implementing the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with. And Galway City Council, I've certainly seen before I even started the job, the evolution really of the city because of the measures from the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan, which has been really, really positive. Positive for as an amenity, but also very positive for biodiversity. So another part of our role is obviously looking for funding. So it's a huge part of our job, and also then administering that funding. I would say we're going into a next iteration of Biodiversity Action Plan in Galway City, running from 2025 to 2030, and I say that's to come from the recently published Biodiversity Action Plan, the fourth iteration of that. So really, it's a shorter time frame than the last one, because it's really the changes are rapid changing in our ecosystems, but also legislation and policy. So it's really to try and have a plan that can work and can be adapted to deliver really on emerging data, on emerging science, and equally reacting to, I suppose, the issues with regards to climate action. So it's very much is with regards to the planning hierarchy. It will be administered through the City Development Plan and also the Climate Action Plan with regards to biodiversity action. Numerous pieces of legislation, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, that we have to familiarise ourselves with, and to ensure that this legislation is incorporated into our actions and our objectives for planning development, or for our biodiversity action plan. And so really they're very, very similar to what we also combined within the City Development Plan, which would then be regulated through the Planning and Development Act and regulations. So coming from European right through our own national, certainly the Wildlife Act, Water Framework Directive, air quality, soil. So there's numerous pieces of legislation that we have to consider when we're developing our actions and projects within our jurisdictions. Biodiversity can influence, and I'm hoping will influence, all departments within the local authority. And that's certainly that there is consideration of biodiversity and our green spaces in future planning and strategic planning within the city. So as I say, it's informed by the City Development Plan, as our recently published Climate Action Plan, which has been produced by all local authorities. We're currently working on the green spaces strategy, and that's really to look at our green spaces and how we're using them, because there's huge pressure, and this would be the same across all local authorities with regards to land use, land availability, and there are competing requirements for that land. So whether it be agriculture, housing, of course, housing prices, flood relief, how to attenuate water on the land, and you've got biodiversity and also amenity pressure, sports capital. So there's all these competing interests really in land, and particularly in urban space. So it's how can biodiversity be absorbed, how can it be subsumed into those plans, and how can it be considered at the very early stages of planning, in that we can hopefully avoid impacts but mitigate and, as I say, very much enhance where we can the biodiversity of our green spaces. I'm also heavily involved in the Corca flood relief project. My background would have been an impact assessment, environmental impact assessment, and flood relief schemes. I would have worked in a number of those across the country. So I'm very interested, and again, participating and actively engaging with the experts in the area and looking at nature-based solutions with regards to flood relief projects in conjunction with the engineering options. So I work with the fabulous team. I'm in the Recreation and Amenity Department and in Parks in Galway City Council. So I work with an amazing team, and they've been forging ahead with the Pollinator Plan way before I even started in the with the local authorities. So they've done amazing work, and as I said, they really have transformed the city in the last number of years. And again, it's changing hearts and minds, working with local communities, empowering local communities about, I suppose, managing their green spaces for biodiversity, but also the value that that's giving to their children, and also with regards to mental health. And I suppose we all knew that from COVID, actually, the value of actually being in a wild space, in a green space, and I suppose just we're helping people to kind of cope and navigate through those challenging times. So it's really recognising the value of biodiversity and nature, for our very well-being. So a part of my job is outreach projects, so engaging with the local communities. Ponds are a real passion project of mine. I know having some discussions with the planners and engineers in Galway City Council, and that we're trying to keep water out of the city, no mind bring it back into it. But certainly there's very little water, actually, particularly in the east of the city, with regards to standing water ponds. Also, you have the mighty Corrib and Galway Bay, but clean freshwater sources are a real challenge, and there is really a lack of availability of clean water for biodiversity. So, working with local communities on establishing ponds and creating clean spaces for biodiversity, but also again for mental health and education. We're also working on nature-based solutions, which is part of the Buaile Bó Ballyloughane project, and really what I suppose has been a very, very powerful project was the sand dune project in Grattan Beach. So that's just east of Salt Hill, if you're familiar with it, of the prom. So walking from the prom into town, you'll pass it, and we put in about 130 metres of sand fencing, chestnut paling fencing to establish sand dunes. And really, I suppose there was a lot of scepticism about it. How could a little bit of fencing help really with established sand dunes? But equally, how can it protect the infrastructure to the back of the beach? What had happened before is that sand was blowing up onto the road. It was blocking drains and actually blocking access onto the road after severe storm events. So after a few months, actually I'm sure you noticed that on that one, that sand actually was held on the beach by the sand fencing, and vegetation established and biodiversity came back into an area there was no biodiversity there at all for a number of years. So very small interventions actually into the landscape can have really significant impacts, positive impacts with regards to our battle against climate change. I'm also working with our experts in the marine environment from ATU at the University of Galway and also the Marine Institute with regards to seagrass restoration. And again, in the urban space, then looking where we can bring biodiversity into the city area, but also for it to provide a benefit with regards to stormwater management. Invasive species, again, you may all be very familiar with these. So we're looking across the marine, the terrestrial and the freshwater. So this map is really a data gathering. So it's a desktop, but our expansive invasives is actually far greater than this, and particularly along our aquatic zones, our canals and up through the Corrib. So this is a project that has been running for a number of years, really to try and capture that data. And we're also trialling, experimenting really with herbicide-free methods of controlling our invasive species, and trying to get as much information for people to be able to manage invasives, or equally with experts with regards to education, particularly the very troublesome species such as Japanese knotweed and giant hogweed. So it's really, and again, it's very much about geographical. Invasive species behave differently around Ireland, so we're looking very much at how these species are spreading in the west of Ireland because of our climate, and it's really kind of so to making it very, very site specific. So we're really working very closely with experts and invasives trying to do that. And so you're looking at finding alternatives to herbicide. This is a foam stream. This is horsetail. This people might be familiar with. So and it can be it's not a regulated species, but it can be very troublesome, particularly in our urban spaces. So as technology emerges and I suppose looking at products and techniques that are biodegradable and have a minimal impact on the environment, we're really looking to do our utmost with that and trying to certainly minimise the use of glyphosates and herbicides. So the funding, the main funding stream for the biodiversity officers is through the Department of Housing and Local Government and Heritage. And so that's the Local Biodiversity Action Fund. So I started with Galway City Council in 2022. So that was my first job, was to try and get some funding. So the projects we're working on, Ballyloughane wetland restoration. So a number of these projects actually are framed around these nature-based solutions, which I'll discuss a little bit later on, and looking at ecosystem services, how to work with nature, really with regards to a number of our threats and pressures to our ecosystem, but also to our way of life. So looking at land restoration projects and invasive species, as I mentioned, and working with local conservation groups, Birdwatch Ireland, Coastwatch, Sea Search, is a number of amazing conservation groups working tirelessly across the country. So looking to support them in any way we can with training and equipment. Very exciting project for Galway this year, Galway City, and it's also in Galway County, is the Burn Bio project. You'll be familiar with it would have come from the Burn Bio Trust in Burn there, and it was rolled out in Clare, in Mayo, and also it's in Meath and Leitrim as well this year. So it's very exciting, and particularly for an urban space. So that's just starting now, so it'll be interesting to see how that progresses over the summer. Also recording mayfly with regards to their conservation status, ecological modelling, and I have a slide on that actually, which is a very interesting project. And again, looking at the value of our green spaces for wildlife connectivity. Galway Swift project, we've had a decline of at least 60-70% of our swift population in Galway City, which is really kind of mirroring house improvement, home improvement, installation projects, which is absolutely amazing, very, very valuable and very important for people with regards to energy prices, but unfortunately it's removing habitat for swifts. So we're just looking to see how we can mitigate that and create new spaces and new nesting habitat for swifts across the city. And as I mentioned, the Barton Beach Dune Restoration Project. So as you mentioned at the beginning there of the presentation, it's understanding our green spaces, understanding what's going on within our jurisdiction with regards to biodiversity and its threats and pressures. So this information is published by the OSI and Táillte Éireann, and it's the land cover map. So this is a more detailed representation of the land cover in Ireland from Corrin. So Corrin would have been a data set that we would have used, maybe you're familiar with, and to say this is more detailed. So a lot of this is done from aerial photography and various different data sets. So this really gives us a really good impression of the land cover in Galway City. So as you can see, it's an extensive urban space, but very much on the periphery and on the edges there. This wonderful green belt, which connects either side of the city right down to the coast, and then let's say the core going right up through the city. So looking at this, we're obviously very, very lucky to have proximity to these green spaces, but really it's looking at the challenges on how to protect them, how to enhance them, and equally how to connect those spaces really for movement of wildlife, but also actually the movement of people without using cars. So so active travel, walking, cycling. So looking at our green network to cater for that, but also very much looking to see how our wildlife moves across the city. And with that, then we're looking at the zoning. So the city development plan, these areas are zoned. And again, as you can see, a lot of those green spaces, for no surprise, would correspond to agricultural land, agricultural high amenity, and our recreation and amenity spaces. So really would cover our green areas, particularly on the outskirts of the city. With regards then to protection of our green spaces, we have a number of designations. We have the international, European designations, special protection areas for birds, and special areas of conservation for animals and habitats. We also have our national designations, natural heritage areas. Our proposed natural heritage areas are protected under agri-environment schemes and our development plans. And also there was areas identified in a previous iteration of the city development plan. So areas that are of high ecological value in a local context. So these are the legislative or planning protection that we have in our green spaces. But as you can see, certainly it's the connectivity between these areas is something that would be of concern. And the reason for that is that so that animals and species can move between sites. And this helps with genetic diversity and also with regards to the preservation of these sites into the future. And it also corridors and ecological corridors, they provide pathways for animals to move away from stress pressures from severe storm events or from disease. And really, so it's in ensuring that there's diversity. It's a good mix of the population. So connectivity is very, very important. So one of the studies I had mentioned earlier on that was supported by the local Biodiversity Action Fund was understanding the movement or the barriers to movement of wildlife across the city. The map there to your left is a national tree map of Galway City. So it looks quite encouraging, but you can see certainly in the east of the city, it is packed with green as opposed to long sinuous areas of woodland or corridors, hedgerows. We can't stress enough the importance of our river corridors, of our hedgerow and tree line network, and particularly for the movement of animals and species. So it's really the Vincent Wildlife Trust did a model, and this model is actually based on circuit theory, electrical circuit theory, and they look at landscape features as resistance. So there's numerous data sets that are fed into this model, and so it's traffic data, the tree information, the tree line information provided to them, and also the landscape. So where there are barriers in the landscape, lighting in particular, so particularly in the urban space. So you can see the areas in red actually indicates high connectivity. So again, mirroring our agricultural lands to the outskirts of the city, how important that landscape is for the movement of our wildlife and the preservation of our wildlife, and equally commuting and wildlife up into the county and also around the city. But as you can see, through the city, there's very, very little in the way of connectivity. And this really would be of significant concern. And it just shows really the barriers to movement of people, but also, as I say, the movement of wildlife through the city. So this is a very, very powerful tool for us to look to see how we can enhance that and how we can protect that into the future. So now looking at our ecosystem services. So I say, looking at the data gathering process is really what I'm doing at the moment. And it's really understanding and, again, communicating the value of nature, of our natural spaces and what they provide for us. Not only our food, clean water, clean air, but also with regards to coastal defence, with regards to storm attenuation, flood defence, nutrient cycling, so the breaking down of nutrients, the recycling of waste, also the culture and our sense of place, our sense of our connection to the landscape, and equally, as I mentioned, the mental health benefits of actually being in our wild spaces and being immersed in nature. It's very, very important. Again, with disease control. So there's numerous, as you can see there in the left, really what nature provides. So I suppose putting it on economic terms and how these things came together is trying to communicate, putting a value on the provisioning of what nature provides for us. So let's see our green network, soil permeability, how water is stored and how it's commuted through the land to the sea and to our water courses. And obviously water stored within the land takes the pressure off our storm sewer network, and equally then helps us with regards to when there are storm events that we have more capacity, which is certainly not the case at the moment. And so water storage is obviously a significant issue and a significant benefit and value really of our ecosystem services. And again, you can see looking again to the outskirts of the city where those ecosystem services are more prevalent and very much relying on those green spaces or agricultural spaces inside the city. And on our bottom right-hand corner there, the carbon storage. Again, those managed grasslands are peatlands, or semi-natural grasslands to the outskirts of the city, and right the way down to the coast where we have agriculture and high amenity value lands. Again, are very, very important with regards to our carbon storage within the city. So I'm looking for opportunities for green infrastructure, so to bring more green spaces into the actual urban centre, and trying to look at novel ways of doing that through hedgerows, through creating stepping stones, and through the Hare's Corner project, by creating small little niches for nature, we can provide stepping stones for our pollinators and for our wildlife to move throughout the city, providing small gaps and hedges on walls. And for very small interventions have far-reaching effects and benefits. So with the green infrastructure, then we're looking then working with nature with regard to nature-based solutions. And nature-based solutions are to look at to sustainably manage and restore our ecosystems to address the societal impacts of climate change. So with working particularly on the flood relief scheme in Galway, we are looking obviously at engineering measures, but how can we also look at nature-based solutions as a support and maybe as an alternative to hard engineering solutions that will provide the land use stacking that we need. So providing for amenity, providing for water attenuation, maybe providing for sports. So it's actually looking at the different land use and actually stacking those land use requirements in our areas to make them function far better, but also looking at how nature-based solutions can be incorporated into that. So, so I've been trialing it at the Sand Dune project in Galway, but the more traditional or the more commonly referred to ones, particularly in urban space, are green walls, rainwater gardens, green roofs. So they'd be normally, I suppose, the go-to in an urban space. So we're certainly looking at those, and I'm also looking at our green space to see how can we manage them better. And as I say, with regards to the Sand Dune project in Grattan Beach, this is a very well-used amenity site, and which an area that had to be fenced, but equally making sure that we can accommodate the recreation side of it, whilst providing a space for nature and also providing a defence against coastal erosion. So this is a project where we're kind of trialling these land use stacking objectives. And as you can see, in a very short space of time, if you leave space for nature, how adapted or how well able it is to establish itself, and if we get out of its way, it certainly knows exactly what to do. As they also seagrass restoration, not immediately visible like the Grattan Beach project, but so this is a very, very important project, and seagrass and salt marsh restoration are very, very efficient at storing sequestering carbon. So this is a very interesting project to be working on as well. So then the conservation grazing project in Ballyloughane. So
sorry, Paula, before you could, the sound is just a little off. I was just wondering two things. One, just you might turn off your camera just for the presentation, and if it's possible to get a little bit closer to your microphone. There's just a little bit. Just try that, and we'll see how it goes. And go on ahead. It's not terrible, but it's just a little bit.
Could be better. Right.
Yeah, and just a little closer to the microphone. I think that might help.
Right here, is that any better?
It is actually.
Right here, okay, that's fine. Okay, so the Ballyloughane Conservation Project. So we looked at the site in Ballyloughane. It's in the peri-urban east side of Galway City, beside the beach. Again, a very well-used amenity. For the beach, there's also a sports ground, the Lee Mellow Sports Ground is close by, and a grassed headland to the east of the beach that is used by walkers, and yeah, it's a very, very well used amenity. It's used morning and night really for people getting the daily walk in. So it's a very, very well used area. So we looked at this area for opportunities. There is an old lake to the back of the prom there that's been filled in over the years. We're looking at opportunities there for nature-based solutions with regards to stormwater management, wave overtopping. And when I was investigating that site with regards to flood attenuation and storm attenuation, we're also looking at the headland and how we could manage that green space better. So there's a network of walks all the way around the area, and so we thought that perhaps this might be an area that we could actually again look at nature-based solutions, looking at improving the ecosystem services of the site, and potentially with conservation grazing. So it was really just something that we just had it was a light enough discussion when we first came to pass. So the context of projects that we're working with a farmer from Lacka with Dexter cows, and we approached the National Parks and Wildlife Service for funding, and it was very much at the latter end of last year that we were approved for funding for this project. And we also got funding from a Creative Ireland programme, and that was particularly with regards to the community outreach and creativity aspects of the project. So the name Buaile Bó, so it comes from the Irish word of enclosure, for animal enclosure, and sometimes referred to as Buaile. So our Irish officer, Marcus, was very good at providing us the name, and it has resonated with the community, and it has certainly worked very well with the promotion of the project. And so just kind of go back a step with regards to conservation grazing. What is conservation grazing? So it's the use of animals to maintain and enhance biodiversity. It's a tool for managing improved and semi-natural habitats and landscape with domestic animals. And as I mentioned it very early on in my talk, is that landscapes have developed really through our grazing, particularly our wonderful grasslands, our semi-natural grasslands, and our woodland habitats. And our habitats really do rely on grazing or that intervention with regards to maintaining the biodiversity, maintaining the different ecosystems within our landscapes. And very much our heritage breeds, our native Irish breeds, have been adapted, have been bred particularly for the conditions in Ireland, and particularly in the west of Ireland, and that they would be hardy enough really to withstand the harsh winter weather, which we certainly experienced this month. So the native, or the Irish Native Rare Breed Society, they have a fabulous website and with a phenomenal amount of information with regards to our native rare breeds. And just looking at the cattle breeds, the Domains, the Moiled, Dexter and Kerry cattle. So as part of this project, I was very keen that we looked at, I would be very familiar with certainly the Scottish breeds with regards to the Galway Belted and the Highland cows, and they've been used across the country, across the UK and Ireland for conservation grazing projects. I think particularly because they're quite docile, and but I was very very keen as part of this project, because obviously it's an environmental but also an agricultural project that we promote, and we certainly I suppose communicate the value of our rare breeds and our heritage breeds as part of this project. So that was really the focus of the project. So I'm researching really conservation projects across the country, and it's really just making sure that the site would be suitable and looking at the principles and the key considerations. It's not something that can be done on every site, and it has to be really carefully thought out and carefully considered. So the main points that we looked at, obviously animal welfare was my top priority, and then understanding actually by doing this project was actually going to benefit the local ecosystem. Again, as I mentioned, the type of livestock, I was very keen that we use the Irish breeds, and then whether or not the site would be able to support the animal without negatively impacting the habitat. Also adjusting to the seasonal requirements, and again, it really got to do with the ecological benefits of the site. What were we really hoping to achieve through the project? Whether or not the project could be monitored regularly, and that we would monitor and publish any data with regards to the project, and whether or not it may inform and support other people in delivering similar projects across the country. So I think one of the trailblazers there is Lithia Youngkin, and she's been managing the goat herd up in Howth Head with regards to fire risk and also with regards to the biodiversity of the site. And there has been numerous papers, and a lovely piece was done by the Irish Times there with regards to the different conservation grazing projects that are going on across the country, and using the different breeds of animal. And very, very supportive and very encouraging. So based on the people have certainly gone way before me, that I was encouraged that this project may work. It may stand a chance of actually succeeding in this space, but the challenge of being that it is in an urban, for all that it's at a beach, it's around, it's a very densely populated residential area and a very heavily used amenity. So that they were certainly very valid concerns about the project. As I mentioned, Ballyloughane South area it's located at the east of the city, within that peri-urban area, in around the Renmore, Wishka. So it's a very built-up residential area, and as I say, a very, very well-used amenity. The headland itself, we looked at, as I mentioned, there's a pathway network all the way around the amenity, and from a planning point of view, those pathways could not be impeded. You could not impede access to those areas. So obviously there's planning considerations here as well. Now the area is within public lands, so with regards to the project, that made life a little bit easier for me with regards to obviously having to procure lands or land agreements. So there was a little bit easier to deliver the project in that context. And however, but the site actually is within a designated European Site Special Area Conservation, Galway Bay Complex SAC, which is another complicating factor, and then understanding the environmental conditions of the site. The objective of the project really was looking at how we're managing our green spaces. We have vast areas of managed green spaces within Galway City that prior to the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan were mown very regularly on a 10 to 12 day basis rotation. Now the Pollinator Plan has reduced that significantly, but it's looking to see how could we, was there any other novel ways of managing these sites by cutting down our emissions, because obviously mowing and resources and disturbance to wildlife are there other ways of sustainably managing these sites. Again, with regards to, because there was no fertilizer applied to this site, but it was very, very heavy. It is a very heavy grassland. So whether or not we could reduce the grass energy within those green spaces to improve the sites for biodiversity. Also looking for opportunities to provide nesting habitats, nesting and feeding and refuge for our coastal birds, but also species such as skylark and meadow pipit that have attempted to nest in the headland on numerous occasions. However, because of the amenity pressure and dog walkers, dogs running across the green spaces, obviously are not compatible with nesting birds. So as well as that, we're required to look at nature-based solutions as part of our climate adaptation goals and under the local or the climate action plan. So there's a number of different objectives really that I'm looking to kind of achieve through this project. And again, as I mentioned, the developing cultural heritage interest in our native stock species, and the outreach element of the project was obviously a significant aspect. So there's loads of information out there, particularly that has been prepared and compiled by the National Biodiversity Data Centre, who've done amazing work over the last number of years and digesting complex scientific principles and making them very available for people, and how small changes can really help biodiversity. Also the Farming for Nature, wonderful publications. And really, I suppose, it's understanding the role of grasslands and sustainably managed grasslands in climate action and carbon sequestration and storage. So I'd identified the site, understood the planning issues, the land conditions, the environmental conditions, and then how would I actually get animals onto this site? It was obviously a very significant part of the project. I don't have any animals myself, so I reached out to the Soils Environmental Advisor at Teagasc, and she was very, very helpful in basically, I suppose, kind of reassuring me that actually this project could actually be could be a runner. So they came and visited the site, and obviously my concerns were because at the time it wasn't fenced, and obviously animal welfare being our priority, what would be required to ensure the animal welfare at the site, and then whether, and she also helped identify or reach out to colleagues if they knew of anybody that had a heritage region would be interested in participating in the project. So Keith Fahy actually is a part-time farmer and also works in Teagasc. He'd started breeding dexters, and thankfully was very happy to participate in the project. So really, it was amazing that we were able to find somebody that was so enthusiastic and very happy to participate, and absolutely give us his animals to to have in an area where he wasn't actually based. So very much entrusting these animals to Galway City Council and to the people of Brenmore. So as part of that, we had to do a approach assessment screening report with regards to the site being designated as a special area of conservation. And as I say, our studies with regards to the environmental conditions. We also looked at the stocking rate. Keith at the time had 8 animals, but based on the size and the availability of animals, actually when the project was initiated, so we had 5 available to us. So the stocking rates are based on the type of habitat and also the species of animal that you're using. So it's in various publications. Also, the Rare Breed Society have some information on that on their website with regards to stocking rates. Obviously, part of the project, because we're working in a public space, public community, was a consultation piece with with stakeholders in the local community. So again, it was really like a soft launch. It was kind of just engaging with the main people around there, the active retired, whether or not they were interested in becoming part of the ambassador program, with local schools and local councillors, GAA, whether just really kind of finding out just did they think we were mad doing something like this in an urban space, and would they be happy to participate? And really, I suppose, looking for support for the project. And then equally trying to kind of gather information on our communication piece. How are we actually going to communicate this project to the local community? What was the education aspects of it? Or how are we going to really engage and excite the enthusiasm and interest of the local people and the local schools on this project? So a lot of work went on behind the scenes and a lot of research really into how we communicate this project. And so thankfully, Keith gave us his lovely Dexters. And I say that Dexters have been used across the country. They're used in the Burn and a lot of upland sites, particularly in Kerry. But also, and our president has them up in Oras Neutron as part of a grazing project there. So I'm certainly inspired that there's certainly evidence to support that this project could work at this site, and because it's a very exposed site there, and because they're hardy animal, we were happy, and Keith was happy that they'd be hardy enough to really withstand the environmental conditions. And the benefits of Dexters is that they, I suppose, in comparison to mowing can back the ground and it gives it an even sward. Whereas the cattle, they gradually move through the paddock. They wrap their tongue around the grass and pull it up. So they're creating these small little exposed areas for the native wild flora seed to establish. Also, the hummocks that are formed, or the variable grassland sward, provides the microhabitats for other species of birds, reptiles, amphibians, and small mammals. And they can hide safely within the meadow and move from one microhabitat to another. So really, it's really kind of looking as though the value of them is actually removing that grass energy really from the grassland, removing the competitive grass. It's a very heavy grassland. The grass, because it was only mown once a year, would tip over and smother any of the native flora. The seed bank is there, but they weren't really given a chance to really establish. Dexters have quite small hooves. They're quite small and wide, but then they don't poach the ground very readily. But the small areas again provide space for the wild seed to establish. And also, dunging was a concern of the public with regards to smell. But equally, then part of the education piece is like the value of cow dung to local biodiversity and from insects, fungi, and microorganisms, and how it's all broken down and delivered back into the soil. And again, about recycling, not having to fertilise the ground, and providing all of this food source, the very necessary food source to our smaller mammals in the area and birds. And for the area is about 1.7 hectares. As I say, it was managed as no-mow for the last 5 years or so. The habitat is classified as dry meadows and grassy verges with the Irish classification system. And in the Irish vegetation community system, it's false old grass and cocksfoot grassland. I'd say a very, very dense grassland sward. So, as I said, there were some species, wild flora, found within from the botanical assessments that were conducted. So we had confidence that the seed bank was there, and with proper management and grazing regime, that the natural flora would be given a chance to flourish in the area. So species such as self-heal red clover, tufted vetch, and common knapweed, were found within the sward. So the animal welfare aspects, because as I say, this is an amenity site with a path network and really nothing else, and very, very minimal in the way of shelter. There's no real hedgerow or vegetation around the periphery. Because it's a very windy site, and for all the Dexters are a hardy breed, persistent rain and wind would be obviously a considerable concern and issue for the animals. So we've managed to get it was actually a concrete dugout, but it was actually very effective at the site. So we got that from Murphy Concrete. So it wasn't their normal request for concrete dugout without the seating, but it actually worked very effectively for the animals, and we lined it with cow mats. We also provided, Keith was able to provide a portable IBC water supply. Because it's a pilot project, we weren't sure how it was going to develop or whether or not it would be successful. Everything that really was installed was temporary, and just for us to kind of to understand and see how the project developed over time. So there was no permanent water supply provided there. But our park staff, who were amazing and also have farming background, have farms themselves, they really looked after the day-to-day welfare of the animals. And then at night we had a security team checking the gates, checking the locks, checking the animals, checking their welfare at night. So really there was 24-hour surveillance of the animals, but also the people of Redmore really took ownership of them, and any issues or anything that were communicated back to us very quickly, which was very rare, thankfully. We also engaged the people as a part of an ambassador programme. And I conducted ecological monitoring, which will be ongoing throughout the 4 months. So as part of our information, we created a poster, which is provided on our website, but also at the site. And just to explain, I suppose, the value of having a diversity of species within a grassland, the different leaf types, sizes and shapes, with regards to not competing with each other for space and light, as the grasses were the dominance of grass, as they're competing for the valuable nutrients in the area. But also the variability in root depths and that role in bringing water further down into the soil, but also with regards to organic carbon and keeping the carbon down into the soil with regards to climate change. So that was a very important aspect of the project, and very much supported by Creative Ireland with regards to the artistry, but also the scientific principles of the project. And then also
we're going to have to finish up. We're 10 minutes to go, and so if you're nearly finished, you might just if we could get a few minutes then for questions.
Rightio, yeah. I think it's just most of it there. So this is our ambassador program and our public outreach, and then our next steps with regards to monitoring, botanical monitoring, and also with climate flux monitoring, and establishing more permanent features as well for animal welfare. Now there was that video, but as I say, we can hear that video after about the Great Irish Grasslands, and that was me, yeah. So the animals were moved off site last week, so they were on site for 10 weeks in total, and so they're gone back to their farm in Lacca to calve, and hopefully be back again with us late September this year. And that's it.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry now to interrupt you there.
Sorry.
No, I'm just I supposed to leave a few minutes for questions. So it's designed to be a winter grazing project with them gone then for the summer. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah. So really, ideally, you have the animals grazing from October to March, and then you're coming into the growing season. Obviously, because of our weather conditions this year, there were some challenges there, but we extended the grazing until April because there was still a lot of grass for them to eat. But coming into May, we're coming into the autumn growing season, so the animals moved off site. But ideally, the time is October to March.
Okay, just remind people to use the Q&A for any questions. You might just stop sharing there. And you didn't end up with any problems with excessive poaching in any areas, or the animals gathering and spending a lot of time in small areas and doing damage?
No, so the site, as they divided up into 2 paddocks. The larger one, we brought them to the larger one first, again because of the weather. The smaller one was near the coastline. So actually in that site, other than the work that we had to do, so obviously we're going in and out with tractors with the water and putting in the windbreaks and things like that. So Actually, we're the ones that cause the damage more so than the animals, to be honest with you, because the ground is a little bit soft. But no, actually, that in that first big paddock, they did really, really well. Now, there obviously was curiosity of the animals, of the people. They hadn't been familiar with obviously that many people, and certainly weren't familiar with dogs. So a little bit by the fence, but really nothing that would be of any concern, and certainly no big areas of bare ground or waterlogging or anything like that. So I was actually delighted with the first site. The second site, because of weather, we couldn't move them as soon as we wanted, and they didn't get as long on the second site, unfortunately.
And in terms of the footfall of humans, did that increase, reduce? What kind of reaction were you getting to it?
Well, yeah. So at the beginning, and yeah, I suppose lessons learned on the project. Once actually we had an idea for the project, and so we're working very closely with Keith. That actually funding came in kind of last minute, and when funding comes in, it has to be spent very quickly as well. And so the fencing went in before we had time to do our PR side of the project, and completely understandable. We received some negative feedback on that, and particularly I suppose with fencing, and I suppose it's seen as you're stopping people, prohibiting them from using a space that differently to the way they used it before. So yes, we had to kind of backpedal a bit on that. So certainly, I suppose if any advice to anybody, it really is that public engagement, that public participation. And because it's in an urban space, it's not as easy as just opening a gate and letting them in. There are lots of moving parts to something like that. And as I say, a well-used amenity. But we'd at least 1,000 children from the schools, local schools came and participated in the project. And people, it was part of their their daily ritual to go down and see the cows. And really, other than the initial negativity, the people of Renmore and Duishka really embraced the project and were so supportive and fascinated by it, really. And children that had never seen animals up close, and having that discussion about where their food comes from. And a lot of children not having that knowledge, not knowing that where milk comes from, where beef comes from. And then having that discussion about methane and about climate change and about having loads of different species in the grassland helps with that. And so, but yeah, so it was a bumpy start. Let's put it that way. But yeah, we got there.
A few questions coming in there now, Ivan.
Yeah, Paula, I suppose one here, you mentioned that, the land is SAC and that you had to do an environmental assessment. What, in those discussions and so on, where does the use of that land for agriculture versus, we'll say, letting it scrub up or taking like a cut of silage and so on, was there any discussion on that, or which is most beneficial? And then I suppose the lead on, what are the next steps as we'll say for the management of the site over the coming years in the line of monitoring?
Yeah, so it's an interesting site in that for all it is included within the designation boundary, but it's actually made ground. So the initial boundary would have been mapped from the old 6-inch mapping. So that area was filled over time with rubble, with limestone rock, to create space for the housing developments within the Renmore Duishka area. And so then it was capped, but it's actually the limestone grassland that has formed there because of the nature of the ground and because it's inert material. So with regards to, say, I suppose people might be familiar with the conservation objectives or the objectives of the designated site, this grassland actually isn't one of them. So because it's a coastal designation. So the area was being managed as a grassland, and because it had, or I would say, affinities to annexed habitat, that we would actually encourage and develop that grassland actually to benefit the biodiversity, benefit the local ecology. But with regards to establishment to scrub, was never really a question or a discussion. It was actually managing it as grassland the best way that we could. And yeah, there's other grasslands in the city that are cut for silage, other areas that are grazed or rented. But this was very much a project with regards to conservation and biodiversity with agriculture.
Will you be doing ongoing monitoring to look at the value of the site, the value of the habitat over the coming months and years to see how the habitat does change?
Yeah, so we had the baseline biodiversity study done first, and that will be ongoing this summer. So we'll do early, mid, and late summer transects across the site, and then working with ATU, we'll look at doing carbon flux monitoring, and also then public perception surveys as well with regards to these types of projects, particularly in an urban space, which I think would be a benefit then if anybody else wanted to participate. I suppose just as I say, the lessons learned. I'm very happy to share that it wasn't easy at the time, but it's not overly straightforward in an urban space, but it can be done. It can be done, and certainly bring the people along with you. The people that are using the space with you is certainly something that I've learned, and it's a very, very important part of the project.
Just maybe briefly, you mentioned the invasive alien species, something that we're very aware of in the farming sector at the moment. Any, I suppose, any lessons from the work you've undertaken? And there was a particular question on the herbicide-free control methods used, and what was the success with that?
Yeah, so the herbicide-free, they can be very successful when you've got a young stand or just a new colonization. So if it's something that's quite small, it's delicate, they can be very effective. It's hot water that's encapsulated in an oil, a biodegradable oil. Other measures we're doing, we're mulching, digging out. So winter heliotrope is a huge problem across the city. It's not regulated. So we're mulching that using no-dig principles as well in certain areas. Physical methods for the likes of giant hogweed. We are using a herbicide where we need to obviously Japanese knotweed. Again, looking at excavation, shallow bunds. It's a combination, and I think everybody unfortunately, if I knew the solution, I'd be a very rich woman. But yeah, it's trial and error, and it's very much looking at how species are behaving where you live, because the guidelines out there might not be applicable or might not be the best fit for you. So it's maybe talking to local advisors, local experts. But it is trial and error, and so what we're finding certainly with Japanese knotweed, because of the treatment that's been going on in the city, overdosing of glyphosate, it's becoming resilient and certainly becoming dormant. And then we think that it's been removed or eradicated, and it emerges a few years later. So it's very, very complex, and there's no quick and easy fix. But I think it's a combination. So it's kind of beating it back with various different techniques, and the herbicide-free methods can certainly help with early establishment. Actually, at that site, we actually have Japanese knotweed that was excluded from the grazing area. But yeah, it's consistent approach with those very prolific species.
Will the fencing be seen as an impediment during the summer, or will you open up the area for access again during that period?
Yeah, I take your point. No, we're actually going to keep it closed because of nesting birds.
Okay.
And so the skylark and meadowpipit have started to nest there, and which they haven't been able to do for a number of years. And people often mentioned that before it became a very busy site, that they missed the call of the skylark. But yeah, we've heard they've actually started to nest this year. So because there's a lot of dog walking in the areas, that we're going to keep the area fenced off and monitor the birds. Because there's very little in the way of other available grasslands in the area for them to nest. So, and that's been part of the project as well. So it's not only grazing during the winter months, but then providing a space for nature during the summer.
And there was a question there around the use of sheep fencing, but I presume that's as much to keep dogs out of the area as it is to keep animals inside.
That's it, exactly. Yeah. So it's the Farm Relief Service that put in the fencing first, and it did a great job. So it was very, very effective. But in this situation, I know in Clare, when they had the winterage, the animals graze right down to the beach. Because it's a very new project and the animals would not have been used to the area, fencing was necessary. Yeah.
Okay. Now, some very complimentary comments coming in there as well from a few of our regulars. And listen, I think we're going to have to leave it there. It just shows what can be done if the will is there. Hopefully, it's going to be able to be sustainable for the City Council to continue, and hopefully the funding that's required to do it probably won't be huge on an ongoing basis, but hopefully it will be in place, and it becomes a huge resource for the local people, local children, etc. So listen, best of luck with it, and thanks very much for coming on and describing it to us. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks very much. Appreciate that. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks to Ivan for helping, and to Yvonne for supporting us in the background. Next week we'll be joined by Jack Nolan and talking about organic farming in Ireland. A huge increase has occurred over the last number of years in the level of organic farming, a huge level of increase in the support provided through schemes. So Jack will come on, and he's been with us a few times before, and I think he's tended to draw a good crowd when he comes on. I think he's our record viewership was one of Jack's talks. So I really look forward to Jack coming on next week and giving us an update on what's happening in organics within the country. So until next week, enjoy your bank holiday weekend, and we'll see you next Friday.